Cybersecurity is one of the top 3 issues on every board of directors' minds. It is critical for organisations to take this very, very seriously. So if we look at cybersecurity, there's some funny stories around here. So if we look at the most hacked passwords of 2020, and there's a site that you can go to which shows you the passwords that were hacked. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that was hacked 25 million times. Probably not the greatest password. The second most hacked password, only 5 million hacks associated with this, was 1 to 9. So, a similar trend here. The third ranked password, which was very interesting, as I love you. So, interesting that is a very hacked password. So, if any of your passwords are these, then you should change them. But we do need to get very, very conscious of how important passwords are. We also need to worry about phishing. One of the extraordinary things is that often the human layer is what causes these hacking attacks to happen. And there was I won't mention the name of the company because it's quite a nasty comment that was made, but it's a massive American company that was one of the biggest data breaches in the world. And there was a congressional inquiry into this particular breach. And so one of the politicians who was in the inquiry in the US, when they understood how the hack happened, and the hack was really caused by something very simple. It was that the software had not been upgraded with what's called patches, which in the software world, patches come out all the time for software. It sort of upgrades the software because there's some sort of deficiency or bug in the software. Very common. This particular organisation had an enormous treasure trove of people's personal information and a very poor approach to applying these patches. And ultimately, this politician, after hearing all of the evidence, said, you know what, I don't think there's a law we can pass that fixes stupid. Pretty harsh stuff, but the reality is that human layer is so important. And within organisations, you can really create a change in your cybersecurity profile and really improve your cybersecurity by working significantly on that human layer. Phishing emails, making sure that you're doing a lot of phishing tests to just get people a bit more skeptical, because I think the problem is, and Australia performs terribly when it comes to phishing emails, because we're very open and trusting, I guess, and not very cynical. So when you are looking at your emails, put the cynical visor on and ask, do I really know where this is coming from? Is this really from the ATO? Is this really from some other government agency or the police or my bank? The most pressing scourge of 2020 in cybersecurity was the rise in ransomware. And frankly, in the work that we've been doing, I've never seen anything like the growth in ransomware. And so a company called CrowdStrike put out a survey to the top 200 Australian companies and found that 67% of organisations had been hit with a ransomware attack. That's more than 10% higher than the global number. And 33% paid a ransom, and the average ransom amount was $1.5 million. And that's something which I'm certainly seeing, which is it used to be you'd get a ransomware demand for Bitcoin and it would be $10,000 or $20,000. Now it's coming in and they start at $1.5 or $2 million worth of Bitcoin. And then CISOs, so this is the Chief Information Security Officer, they're becoming a critical part of every organisation. So 63% of CISOs said that working from home presented a very significant challenge to cybersecurity. And last year, 74% of CISOs got more budget for cybersecurity. And that is critical because ransomware is absolutely on the rampage, and it's only going to get worse. We've seen listed companies collapse as a result of ransomware. We saw a cybersecurity incident pull down a big hedge fund. So this is existential crisis time, and all boards, all senior management, everyone in the organisation needs to be concerned about and taking responsibility for cybersecurity. going to particularly talk about ransomware protection because I see so much of it. So I think the key 6 things to think about with ransomware is firstly training. Please spend money on getting training for people to understand about things like phishing, like passwords, etc., etc. And it needs to be regular. It can't be once a year. It can't be, oh, you know, they did the module when they joined the organization. This needs to be every month. You need to drive it in. You need to spend money. You need to invest in good cybersecurity training that's accessible for people. And if you'd like to find some of that, then I'm more than happy to send you a proposal, just as a little proposition there. The second thing is security by design. So what we've seen, some of the worst breaches have happened as a result of hackers getting into a organization and then finding once they're inside, they can access all of the data in the organization. So if you look at Target in the US, which was a very large attack, so the hacker got in actually through the passwords via the Target's air conditioning vendor. And then once they got in through those passwords, found that they had pretty much unfettered access to a lot of data within that organization. So the idea of locking down data, it's not simple, but it is critical. You need to think about it in the same way. You don't lock up your pens and pencils, but you probably lock up, any checks that you receive or any cash that you have, that all gets locked up. We need to think about data in the same way. So the really important stuff, that's got to be kept heavily locked up. Only a couple of people can access that. The other stuff, we don't mind. Others, that can be more accessible. And backup, this focus on backup, it needs to be really, really driven throughout the organization. And one thing that you should never do, I had one ransomware attack, which was just terrible, where a client was hit with a ransomware attack and the IT person, meaning well, thought, oh, well, I'll just go to the backup. So they didn't have any significant security training. And so they went to the backups and started backing up from that. And the ransomware is smart enough to figure out what's going on and so encrypted all of the backups as well. So please do backup. And then you've got to spend something on technology and you've got to test it regularly. So you could spend hundreds of millions of dollars, frankly, on cybersecurity technology, and it's probably, there will come a point where there's very, very marginal returns on that. So make an appropriate investment in the technology and invest heavily in the training and the people, the human layer, and making sure your people understand. Number 5 is cyber insurance. So cyber insurance, be careful with it. It's helpful to have, but it's not a panacea. I had a client who, the CEO called me up and, when your business is encrypted, completely shut down, and you can't access any systems or your data, the idea that you've got some cyber insurance, which might cover some of the loss, but certainly not all of the loss, is not very helpful. And so you need to think about, it's part of a basket of things that you should do, but please, a lot of people think of it as, we've got cyber insurance, we'll be fine. That's not the case. As this particular CEO said to me, he goes, why is this happening to our business? It's unfair. I'm like, unfortunately, it's the nature of things. As I said, this is a war, and I think we need to recognize that if you fail to prepare, then you prepare to fail. And so in preparing, that brings us to the 6th issue, which is the data breach response plan. So every organization should have a very detailed data breach response plan. This stuff is happening so frequently that you cannot afford to not have a response plan. So as I said, this is a winnable war, but it is a war. And unfortunately, I just see that only one side really knows that right at the moment. So I think every organization needs to really think about this and put themselves effectively on a war footing, because the hacking and the ransomware is just going to get more